This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on oil and gas infrastructure projects across the nation worth 1.5 lakh crore rupees inaugurated by the Prime Minister. The participants are Utpal Bhaskar, energy expert, and Rajesh Lakh, anchor.
Mr. Utpal Bhaskar, it's a joy to have you with us on Akashvani.
Thank you for having me.
Would you elaborate to how these projects align with the government's broader energy security and infrastructure developmental goals? Can you provide an overview of the oil and gas infrastructure projects inaugurated by the Prime Minister, including their scope, objective, and geographic distribution?
Thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform. I'm sure you and the listeners would be aware that India is hugely energy dependent. As a country, we import over 85% of our crude oil requirement, around 50% of our natural gas requirement. Now, if you take a look at the projects which are being inaugurated by the Prime Minister, these projects are worth around 1.48 trillion spread across the country. Primarily, we're looking at projects including the refinery project in Barauni. We are also talking about petroleum and natural gas project. Along with what the Prime Minister has inaugurated, he's also spoken about the first oil. He's dedicated the first oil from the KG Basin project to the nation. And this was flagging of the first crude oil tanker from the ONGC Krishna Godavari deepwater project. Also, if you look at the expanse of the projects that are being taken across the country, includes expansion of the Panipat refinery and petrochemical complex in Haryana, a 3G ethanol plant and catalyst plant at the Panipat refinery. Also the Visakh refinery modernization project in Andhra Pradesh, city gas distribution network project as well, Mumbai High North redevelopment phase 4 in Maharashtra. Apart from all of this, the Prime Minister also laid down the foundation stone of the Indian Institute of Petroleum and Energy, which is at Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh. Now, why are these projects important? As I said earlier, we do not produce enough of both our crude oil and our natural gas requirements in the country. KG D6 is something which has been in the works for a long period of time. Not a very easy project. It has taken ONGC a lot of amount of time, energy and money to develop it. And given that, and also if you look at the way that the world is around us at this point of time, there are two wars being fought. Anything which is energy is primarily a lot of things, the pricing and all of this, what comes to the end consumer is all dependent upon the external elements. To sequester from all of this, a country like ours, which is still growing and the GDP numbers are telling us a story, you need energy to fuel that demand. You need energy to fuel this economy. And hence, India needs to be energy self-sufficient. It's still a far way off, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about the first oil from KG Basin. I want to know from you, Utpal, the extraction of first oil from KG Basin will mark a historic achievement in India's energy sector, promising to significantly reduce our dependence on energy imports. And I would like you to discuss that in detail.
One thing is for clear that one such find, obviously it's a step in the right direction, but it's not going to make a huge dent in our import bill. If you look at India's crude oil and petroleum products imports are valued around 210 billion in FY23. We are more or less on the same trajectory this year as well. Why is it so? Obviously, we are the world's third largest oil importer. So there are two parts of this play. One, India needs to absolutely amp up the domestic exploration. And once there are projects where there is absolute certainty there is either oil or gas to be found there, to bring it online. That is the production part of the spectrum. The other thing is also what India is doing is, and that is the reality of this playbook, is that you cannot increase your production in such a speedy manner because obviously it takes a lot amount of time and years, many years to bring project online. So what do you do then? So then you look at places where you were never getting oil or gas from. A significant case in point will be Guyana. So India is looking at getting oil from Guyana. Guyana has been one of the largest discoveries in the recent years in anywhere in the world. If you see all these high profile visits which has been happening from Guyana to India. The top leadership has been visiting India. India has been trying to get this oil at preferential rates through long-term contracts. We have been trying to, when you look at the energy basket, we are trying to ink long-term crude supply contracts from elsewhere. This is primarily aimed at de-risking our oil supply chain. Namibia being another country. We have signed supply contracts with Brazil, which is Petrobras. We have also signed long-term supply contracts with Ecopetrol, which is a state-owned company of Colombia. And this all comes at a time when OPEC plus grouping, for which Russia is a part, they have been going ahead with their production cuts. So in such a scenario, and then there's another thing which has it's absolutely come as a silver lining for India. Venezuelan supplies have opened up because obviously Venezuela was under sanctions from the US. Now they have been allowed to export. Interestingly, Venezuelan oil companies, they own dividends to state-owned companies in India, and then we are trying to secure, in lieu of the dividend, at least we get some oil. So there are two, as I said, there's two parts to this. We cannot wish away imports. They're pretty much here to stay. But we also need to look at increasing our domestic production. And then obviously as a country, we are on this march towards energy transition. Well, alternate sources will play a very important part.
So you mentioned about these two parts, like surely we cannot wish away the imports, and the other being that we need to increase our domestic ways in which to generate energy. So how are these projects, which the Prime Minister have inaugurated, align with the government's broader energy security and infrastructure development goals?
So if you let's purely look at from a refining point of view. So Barauni refinery project, which the Prime Minister touched upon when he was making the speech. India has become the refining hub in this part of the world. So it's not only about whatever we import, we consume all of it. We also refine it, make it into MS, which is petrol, HSV, diesel, also ATF. There's a whole host of products that a refinery then manufactures or refine as a way it goes for it. And then we export it to the other parts of the world as well. India is a significant player in the global refining space. We have significant capacity both in the public sector and in the private sector space. Also, the way geographically we are located, it makes it easier. And if we only look at West Asian crude, which is easier to get in, cost of supply, as in cost of transportation won't be much higher as compared if you need to get crude from other parts of the world, be it Latin America or elsewhere. And then we supply to other markets and in other parts of the world as well. So obviously, from a refining perspective, that makes sense there. Also, for example, when you're talking about the KG Basin, the first oil that we spoke about, this is going to help our meeting a domestic consumption. The Prime Minister also projects which have been taken up across the country when you're talking about the 3G ethanol plant. Now, if you look at something which is very interesting which has happened, India, and this is something which has, I'm sure, government has been trying to push for it at some place. But that India launched this Global Biofuel Alliance at the G20 summit. Now, obviously, we have something called International Solar Alliance as well. But why is this Global Biofuel Alliance important? This is a marquee alliance. India, US, and Brazil are the founding members. They have already seen, I think, more than 22 or 24 countries have joined it. And as was expected, this was basically a kind of an answer to the OPEC plus grouping where both Saudi Arabia and Russia members who are not a part of this alliance. So, in fact, if you look at what has happened in the ethanol space as well today, the government has advanced its target to achieve 20% ethanol blending in petrol. The earlier target was 2030. They plan to do it by 25-26. Look at our transition journey, and everyone is taking notice at it. We have got a very ambitious biofuel roadmap. All of this, so obviously there's something that you need to do on the supply side as well, and then you also need to do a demand side management as well. So we are trying to look at everything which is available at this point of time, because whatever we do in India today, mind you, this impact will not be only felt here or in the subcontinent. The reverberations will be felt across the world.
Okay, so this sounds very interesting, and my next question was leading to the expected impacts of these projects on the country's economy, employment generation, and overall energy landscape. So if you would like to focus on the employment per se and let us know its impact on the employment.
I'm sure a project as big as these, they do contribute towards both direct and indirect employment in the country. And circling back to my earlier point about for an economy of our size and the kind of growth numbers that we have been clocking, the way that this has to be powered will be through energy. Now, energy comes in different forms, be it an molecule or an electron. And all of this will be required. We have seen, while look around the world today, where there is already recession has become a scare word around. Indian economy on a base like ours is still doing very well comparatively with what's happening around the world. So obviously all of this, and one is a direct employment or what kind of direct there's a large refining company puts in, gives out a capex project, order, how much that will then translate into in the overall economic impact. There's a larger thing at play here which is obviously country of 1.5 billion people, economy which is still growing, and also to meet the aspirations of the people around. So we have seen villages now being connected to electricity. We have seen also the way that we want gas, which is natural gas, to serve as an intermediate fuel from where we are now, where conventional hydrocarbons are being used primarily, to the place where we actually want to be when the economy will be green, all green. And all of this will have to play its part, given that we have committed of achieving this carbon neutrality. So absolutely important, and more such projects are required.
Utpal, the Prime Minister laid multiple oil and gas sector projects worth 1.48 lakh crore across the country, which you mentioned a while back, and several development projects in Bihar worth more than 13,400 crores in Begusarai, Bihar. Briefly like you to touch upon this as well.
Announced from Begusarai, where he also talked about it being a land of talented youth. He's talked about farmers and workers. Interesting messaging there as well. So the western part, if you draw a line through from north to south, the western part of the country has done well economically. Is the eastern part, which there have been laggard states, there are all kind of names being called there. But also the government has focused on developing the northeastern part of the country. If you looked at the budget speech where the finance minister also spoke about, the budget speech also spoke about the eastern part of the country, wherein this country has to achieve the aspiration as the government so desires. It cannot happen without a state like Bihar, the huge population, to do well. One of the things that Bihar, and this is always a constant refrain, that there's not enough industries in Bihar. And I'm sure that these are the steps which are being made to push the state in that direction.
Utpal, just to add to what you just mentioned, the PM has also said that history is proof that India has remained empowered when Bihar and Eastern India have been prosperous. And that's why he assured the people of the state that the development of Bihar and the eastern region will make for Viksit Bharat. And I would like to quote the PM here, and he says, this is not a promise, it's a mission, a resolution. These development projects which the Prime Minister have inaugurated, will they become a medium to make India the world's third largest economic power in the world?
Obviously, no one can argue with that. At the end of the day, it has always been that one part of the country, this development model has to be equitable for all. And it cannot be that there is only one part of the country which does well and the other part is always. And that's the reason why we see these problems of internal migration as well. Now, obviously, UP has started coming up. There are investments which are happening in UP, but strangely, and for the lack of investment interest, there's not much happening with Bihar. Obviously, this project, India wants to become the third largest economic power in the world. These projects will be the medium, as said, to contribute towards that. But much more is needed. One thing which has happened for a fact is that people of the country, they have realized that that aspiration has been stoked. And it's no longer the low-hanging fruits are the first ones to be taken care of. But obviously, it has to be at a scale and a manner. And when it happens, and that's the reason why the world is taking notice. Had it happened in a small country, people won't have taken much notice. But anything which happens in India becomes the world's largest in the sheer size of this economy.
Utpal, on that note, we hope that the projects that the Prime Minister inaugurated will herald a new era in India's energy sector, promising to bolster energy security and foster economic resilience. Thank you so much for being with Akashvani.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on oil and gas infrastructure projects across the nation worth 1.5 lakh crore rupees inaugurated by the Prime Minister. The participants were Utpal Bhaskar, energy expert, and Rajesh Lakh, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsttalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.